2 hours. That's how long I stood outside in the January cold, my arthritic fingers fumbling with a key that no longer worked. At 66 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. The real betrayal came when the door finally opened, and my daughter-in-law looked at me with contempt and said those 2 words that would change everything: "You're an outsider." Before we continue, please subscribe to Granny's Voice and write in the comments what time it is where you are watching from now. We might give you a shout-out in our next video. Today's shout-out goes to Sylvia Theodore from Palmdale, California. Thank you for being part of this great family. Now let me tell everything. The January wind felt like a serrated knife that had been dipped in ice water, scraping again and again at my cheeks and my bare hands. I was standing outside the security door of the condo building, trying for the 3rd time to slide my key into the lock. The cold brass of the key touched the equally cold metal of the lock with a faint click. But no matter what, it wouldn't make that familiar half-turn. This wasn't right. Usually, with just a gentle twist, the door would swing open, and the motion-activated light in the lobby would flicker on, casting a dim but warm glow. But today, this door, the one I had walked through for 10 years, was closed to me. The lock wouldn't budge an inch, as if it were mocking my feeble efforts. I pulled back my numb, frozen hand and brought it to my mouth, blowing a puff of hot air into my cupped palms. The white mist vanished instantly into the biting air. I looked up at the sky. It was a dreary grey. It was only a little past 4 in the afternoon, but it already felt like twilight was settling in. A neighbor from downstairs came back from the grocery store, saw me, and paused for a second. He gave a polite nod and a small smile, then beeped the door open with his key fob and slipped inside. The heavy door swung slowly shut in front of me, cutting off the faint warmth from inside and feeling like a gentle thud against my heart. Had they changed the locks? Did David, my son, or Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, change them? Why didn't anyone tell me? I instinctively reached into my pocket for my old flip phone, thinking I should call my son, but my fingertips just traced the cold buttons, hesitating to press down. David had been so busy with work lately, often working late into the night. At this time, he was probably in a meeting or rushing to finish a project. It didn't seem right to bother him over something like this. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law's increasingly indifferent face appeared in my mind. Forget it. Asking her probably wouldn't get me anything but a sharp word. Maybe one of them had to change the lock in a hurry and just hadn't had a chance to tell me where the new key was. Maybe the new key was under the doormat or inside the utility box on the wall. Clinging to that sliver of hope, I bent my stiff back and struggled to lift the red doormat, the one with welcome printed on it. It was empty underneath, except for years of accumulated dust. I stood on my tiptoes to reach for the utility box on the wall. The box was shut tight. I couldn't reach it, and I couldn't open it. My hope died. A cold sweat started at the soles of my feet, seeping up through my thick winter pants and into my very bones. I had no choice but to retreat to a sheltered corner of the entryway, leaning against the ice-cold brick wall and trying to curl into a ball. The window in the entryway didn't close properly, and cold drafts whistled through the gap. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, huddled in the old down coat I'd had for 5 or 6 years. My late husband Robert had bought it for me, but its warmth had faded over time. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Every minute, an ordeal in a freezer. I listened to my own unsteady breathing and watched the sky outside the entryway window grow darker. The street lights in the complex flickered on one by one. Warm light began to glow from the windows of the other condos. I could faintly hear the sounds of cooking, the murmur of a television, the laughter of children. Those sounds which I usually found noisy now seemed so distant and luxurious. It had been 10 years. 10 years since Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack. After he was gone, I moved out of our old 650 square foot walk-up in the old part of town and came to live with my son and daughter-in-law. I rented out the old place. The rent wasn't much, but I gave every single dollar of it to my son to help with their household expenses. When I first moved in, it was because David had pleaded with me. He had said, "Mom, Dad's gone now. We don't feel right with you living all alone. Come stay with us. You can help out with the cooking, look after Ethan, and we can take care of you. It'll be nice. The whole family together." Yes, nice and lively. And for the first few years, it really was. My grandson Ethan was just starting elementary school. I would pick him up every day and make all his favorite foods. When my son and daughter-in-law came home from work, a hot meal would be waiting. The house was a lot of work, but seeing Ethan's sweet smile and hearing my son call me Mom made me feel like life had purpose again. It filled some of the emptiness Robert had left behind, but I don't know when it started. That liveliness began to sour. Ethan started middle school and didn't need me to pick him up anymore. He even started to find me annoying and didn't want to talk to me much. Vanessa's career seemed to be taking off. She got a promotion, a raise, but the way she looked at me grew more and more distant. She started complaining that my cooking was too salty, that I didn't clean the house thoroughly enough. She said my frugal habits just didn't fit with their lifestyle. And David, he was caught between a rock and a hard place. At first, he would try to mediate when Vanessa and I had friction, but later on he grew more and more silent. He came home from work later and later, preferring to sit in his car for a while rather than come upstairs. In this home, without me even realizing it, I had become the extra person. I tried to minimize my presence. I insisted on doing all the housework. I confined my activities to my small room and the kitchen. Whenever they tried to buy me something, I'd always refuse and secretly tuck the money back into their wallets. I always thought that if I just gave a little more and took a little less, I could maintain the surface level peace of this family. But today, this locked door was like a bucket of ice water poured over my head, waking me up completely. To change the lock without telling me, this wasn't an oversight, it was a silent eviction, a cold declaration. You no longer belong here. My feet were completely numb. I had to stomp them lightly on the ground just to feel them. The arthritis in my knees began to ache, a dull throb like fine needles pricking from the inside. I thought of Robert. If he were still here, he would never let me suffer this kind of humiliation. He was a gentle but decisive man who would have arranged everything perfectly. Thinking of him, my eyes started to burn. I quickly looked up and blinked hard, forcing the stinging sensation back down. I couldn't cry. At my age, crying in the entryway of a building. What a sight that would be. Just when I felt like I was about to freeze solid, I finally heard the familiar click-clack of high heels on the tile floor coming from the stairwell. The sound grew closer. It was Vanessa coming home. The motion-activated light flickered on with her footsteps. Vanessa's figure appeared around the corner. She was wearing what looked like a very expensive wool coat and carrying several nice shopping bags. Her makeup was perfect, but it couldn't hide the fatigue and the trace of habitual indifference in her eyes. She saw me huddled in the corner and visibly flinched. Then her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, and a flash of annoyance, not surprise or apology, crossed her face. "Mom, what are you doing standing out here? Did you forget your key?" she asked as she pulled her own keys from her purse. She unlocked the door with a smooth motion. The new shiny key glinted coldly under the light. The door opened and a wave of warm air washed over me, making my frozen body shiver involuntarily. I followed her into the foyer, flexing my stiff fingers and trying to keep my voice steady. "I have my key. The old one. It doesn't work." I looked at her. "Vanessa, did you change the lock? Why didn't you tell me?" Vanessa placed her shopping bags on the entryway table and bent down to change her shoes without looking up. Her tone was as casual as if she were commenting on the weather. "Oh yeah, I did. Remember we were saying there have been some strangers hanging around the complex. So I called a locksmith and had a more secure one put in. I've had so much on my mind. I guess I forgot to tell you." Forgot. Such a major thing, a thing that determined whether I could even get into this house, and she brushed it off with a casual "I forgot." A heavy feeling settled in my chest. The humiliation and cold that had built up for 2 hours in the wind now surged more acutely in the warmth of the indoors. I watched her change into her slippers and walk straight into the living room. She tossed her expensive coat casually over the back of the sofa, then went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. The entire time she didn't look at me again, let alone ask if I was cold or how long I had been waiting. I stood there in the entryway, my shoes still on, the chill from outside still clinging to me like a shroud. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Vanessa, I I was waiting outside for over 2 hours. It's so cold out. My old bones. My words were cut short. Vanessa came out of the kitchen with her glass of water, leaning against the doorframe of the dining room. She finally looked at me directly. Her gaze was no longer just indifferent. It was filled with an undisguised scrutiny and contempt. She interrupted me, her voice low, but piercing like an ice pick. So, you waited. It's not like I did it on purpose. Mom, and I don't mean to be critical, but you're just so stubborn. If the door doesn't open, couldn't you have gone for a walk in the courtyard or found somewhere to sit down? Standing right at the door like that, if someone saw you, they might think we were abusing you or something. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 2 hours in the freezing wind, I, a 66-year-old woman, and in her telling, it was my fault for being stubborn. A rush of blood went to my head. My face must have been flushed from the cold and my agitation. My voice rose. Vanessa, how can you say that? How was I supposed to know you changed the lock? If I had known, do you think I would have just stood there and frozen? Go for a walk. Where? In this weather, where is an old woman supposed to go? Perhaps my agitation provoked her. The thin layer of civility on Vanessa's face shattered completely, revealing the long, simmering resentment underneath. She sneered, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, lingering on my old down coat and my mud-caked winter boots. All right, Mom. Stop shouting, she said, her tone dripping with scorn. It's not a big deal. Is it really worth all this drama? I think you're just looking for an excuse to be upset. Yes, I changed the lock and didn't tell you. So what? David and I bought this condo. We pay the mortgage. If I want to change a lock, do I need to report every little thing to you? You. I was shaking with anger, pointing a finger at her, unable to form a complete sentence. The mortgage? Yes. They paid the down payment. But when they bought the place, Robert and I gave them $30,000, the bulk of our life savings. We said it was a loan. But in all these years, they never once mentioned paying back a single cent. Besides that, for the 10 years I've lived here, I've given them all my rental income, done all the housework, and raised their son. Even if there's no credit, there's been hard work. How could she speak as if this condo had nothing to do with me? Seeing my state, Vanessa seemed to gain momentum. She took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between us. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Mom, there are some things I've been holding back for a long time. Since we're here, let's just get it all out in the open. You always act like you're the mistress of this house. You have to have a say in everything. Every rule has to be your way. But you need to get one thing straight. This is my and David's home. You are just an outsider. Outsider. The word was like 2 red-hot nails driven directly into my heart. In an instant, all the blood in my body seemed to freeze. A bone-deep chill spread from the pit of my stomach, 1,000 times colder than when I was waiting outside. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I couldn't make a sound. I looked at this woman I had lived with for 10 years. Her face was slightly distorted with agitation and the release of her pent-up feelings. She looked like a stranger. 10 years of devotion. 10 years of tolerance in exchange for being called an outsider. So all my careful efforts, all my thankless work in her eyes, it was all just the pathetic posturing of an outsider who was overstaying her welcome. Vanessa seemed to realize she had gone too far, but the words were out. She paused, her tone softening slightly, but it still dripped with a condescending pity. Look, don't think I'm being harsh. It's just the reality of the situation. You can live here peacefully. We provide for you, so just don't make so much trouble. All right, hurry up and change your shoes. What does it look like just standing there? With that, she turned away, took her glass of water back to the living room, and switched on the television. It was as if that deeply wounding conversation had been nothing more than an insignificant afternoon breeze. And I just stood there like a seashell abandoned on the beach, shattered by the massive wave of that word outsider. My insides felt twisted and bruised. The cold was no longer a physical sensation on my skin. It was radiating from my heart, freezing me from the inside out. The loud laughter of a game show echoed from the television, punctuated by Vanessa's occasional chuckles. The sound seemed to come from another world, blurry and far away. I stood in the entryway, the heat from the vents washing over me, but it did nothing to dispel the ice in my bones. The word outsider echoed in my mind over and over. Each echo was like a dull knife slowly carving up the memories of the past 10 years. The days I woke up before dawn to make breakfast for the family. The nights I waited up for my son to come home from working late. The times I held my feverish grandson in my arms, frantic with worry. The way I saved every penny I could to help them out. All of it in that one moment was casually negated, erased by those two words. It turned out that the family I cherished, the love I had given, was in someone else's eyes nothing more than an outsider's inappropriate intrusion and disturbance. The sharp pain in my chest slowly went numb, replaced by an unprecedented clarity and calm. A strange strength rose from deep within me, holding up my body that was on the verge of collapsing. I didn't do what I usually did when I felt wronged, cry silently or retreat to my room to sulk. Slowly, I bent down, untied the laces of my stiff, frozen boots, and put on my indoor slippers. My movements were slow but incredibly steady. Then I straightened my back. Even though my knees were still aching, I tried my best to walk tall. I didn't go to the living room. I didn't even glance at Vanessa. I walked straight to the room I had lived in for 10 years. It was more of a converted sunroom than a real room. It was small, just big enough for a bed, a dresser, and a small desk. It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer, but I had never complained. I thought, as long as I have a place to stay and can help my son, it's enough. I closed the door, shutting out the noise from the living room. The room was quiet except for the sound of the wind whistling outside the window. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the small space. I didn't have many things. A few sets of clothes, some old photographs, and a few keepsakes Robert had left behind. I could probably pack it all into one suitcase. Yes, pack. The thought appeared in my mind with perfect clarity. It wasn't an act of spite or a momentary impulse. It was a decision that had crystallized after 2 hours in the cold wind and that soul-crushing word outsider. This was no longer my home. To stay here would be nothing but self-inflicted humiliation, living at the mercy of others' moods. I was 66 years old. I might not have many years left, but I couldn't let them be spent in an environment so devoid of dignity and warmth. I thought of my old apartment, that little 650 square foot place in the old part of town. It was old, but every inch of it was saturated with the life Robert and I had shared. After he passed, I followed my son's wishes and moved in with them. The old apartment was rented out to a decent, honest family. The 3-year lease had just ended, and the tenants had moved out last month. David had mentioned it in passing, saying that since the apartment was empty, we might as well rent it out again to help with expenses. I didn't object at the time because I thought my place was here. Now it seemed that fate had left me a way out all along. I took out my old, rarely used flip phone. My finger hesitated over the keypad for a moment. Then I firmly dialed a number stored at the very bottom of my contacts, a number I had never forgotten. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. A steady middle-aged male voice, slightly surprised, came on the line. "Hello, Mrs. Hayes. Is that you? It's been a long time." The caller was Mr. Vincent Crawford, my late husband's most brilliant former student, now a well-known lawyer in the city. When Robert passed away, he helped me with a lot of the legal paperwork. He had always been very respectful, sending me a text message on holidays. I just didn't want to bother him, so we gradually lost touch. "Mr. Crawford, it's me, Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm so sorry to bother you this late. I have something very important I need to ask you about concerning my apartment and a will." Mr. Crawford's tone immediately became serious. "Mrs. Hayes, please don't be a stranger. Just call me Vincent. Tell me whatever you need. Your husband was a great mentor to me. Anything you need is my priority." Hearing his sincere words and comparing them to my daughter-in-law's icy cruelty, my nose began to sting again. But I forced it back. This was no time for sentimentality. I explained the situation concisely without any exaggeration, just stating the facts. My old apartment was currently vacant. My furniture was still there. And most importantly, I mentioned a will that Robert and I had privately drawn up before he died. I had never told anyone about that will, not even David, except for Mr. Crawford. At the time, Robert had said, "Our children will have their own fortunes, but we need to keep something for ourselves just in case." I thought he was being overly cautious then, but now I understood how wise he truly was. Mr. Crawford listened quietly. After a moment of silence, he spoke in a clear and confident tone. "Mrs. Hayes, please rest assured. First of all, that apartment is your and your husband's joint property. After he passed, his half was inherited by you and your son, but you have absolute control over the disposition of the entire property. You have the full right to decide whether to move back in or to rent it out. Secondly, regarding the will, it is completely legally binding. It clearly states that all assets in both your names, including the apartment and your savings, will be inherited by your son after you pass. However, the will also includes a very important clause retaining your right of residence and an additional condition tied to his duty of care." He explained the terms in detail. According to the will, I could move back into the old apartment at any time, a right protected by law. More importantly, the will stipulated that David must fulfill his duty to care for me, ensuring my well-being in my later years. Otherwise, his portion of the inheritance outlined in the will could be judged invalid or partially invalid depending on the circumstances. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Crawford concluded, "if you decide to move back, you are completely within your legal rights. As for what happened today, if you wanted to pursue the matter of them changing the locks and denying you entry, legally speaking, that involves the illegal deprivation of your right of residence, especially when it involves an elderly person. It can be a serious offense." He paused. "Of course, how you wish to proceed is entirely up to you." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, unmoving. Outside, the sky was completely dark. The window reflected my pale but remarkably calm face. The law, rules, rights, things I once thought were so distant from my life were now my only armor and my only weapon. It turned out I wasn't a helpless outsider with nothing at the mercy of others. I still had my own nest and I had the dignity and protection afforded to me by the law. Just then, I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock outside my door. It was David home from work. Then came Vanessa's raised voice full of feigned grievance. I could vaguely make out words like "your mother" making a big deal out of nothing and giving me the silent treatment. I didn't go out. I didn't do what I normally would have, rush out to see if my son was tired or hungry. I just sat there quietly listening to the argument that I had caused, but which no longer concerned me. After a while, the argument subsided, replaced by the sound of Vanessa's sniffling and David's low murmurs of comfort. I slowly stood up, walked to the dresser, and opened it. I looked at the few, neatly folded clothes inside. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile formed on my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, nor one of relief. It was the smile of someone who understood everything, who had let go of all illusions and expectations. A smile of cold, hard resolution. Fine. If I'm an outsider, then this outsider won't disturb your family's peace any longer. I began to pack one item at a time, carefully and slowly. My movements were unhurried, my mind perfectly clear and calm. I knew from this moment on, I was no longer the submissive, long-suffering old woman. I was going to take back my own life, my house, and my dignity. And all of this was just the beginning. The commotion in the living room gradually died down, leaving only the faint, persistent sound of the television. I could imagine the scene out there. Vanessa was probably still dabbing her eyes, while David wore a look of exhaustion and helplessness. Caught between his mother and his wife, he had long grown accustomed to using silence and avoidance as his coping mechanisms. Perhaps he even felt that I, his mother, was being unreasonable again, causing him more trouble. If this had been before, upon hearing him return, I would have immediately gone out to ask if he had eaten, if he wanted me to heat up some soup for him, trying to create the illusion that everything was fine to maintain that superficial harmony. But not tonight. I continued packing in my room. I really didn't have much. A few pieces of clothing I wore often, some personal items, and a small locked wooden box. Inside were my and Robert's marriage certificate, some old photos, and that all-important will. I wrapped them carefully and placed them in the inner pocket of my suitcase. The suitcase was old, bought many years ago, and its wheels were a bit shaky, but it was more than enough to hold all my worldly possessions. Packing each item felt like making a clean break with the past 10 years. The half-finished sweater I was knitting for Ethan was still in the drawer, the knitting needles resting quietly in the yarn. I picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then gently put it back down. I decided not to take it. My grandson was a teenager now. He no longer needed his grandmother's hand-knit unfashionable sweaters. Those ties of affection I thought I was weaving were in reality fragile enough to snap at the slightest touch. While I was packing, I heard David's footsteps approach my door. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he didn't knock. He didn't ask, "Mom, are you okay?" Instead, he turned and walked away. The sound of his retreating footsteps was like the final stone dropping onto the frozen lake of my heart. It didn't create a single ripple. It only made the ice thicker. That was fine. It would make it easier to leave without any lingering attachments. When everything was packed, the suitcase stood in the corner like a soldier, ready for deployment. I sat on the edge of the bed, not feeling the least bit sleepy. The night was deep and the world outside was silent, save for the occasional howl of the wind. I started planning for the next day. First, I needed to call a moving company. I didn't have much. A small van would be enough. Then, I had to go check on the old apartment. I hadn't been back in 10 years. I had no idea what condition it was in. It would need a thorough cleaning. I also had to get the utilities, water, gas, and electricity turned back on. There were a million things to do, but strangely, I didn't feel overwhelmed. Instead, I felt a long-lost sense of control over my own life, a feeling that had nearly vanished during the 10 years I depended on my son. The next day, I was up at the crack of dawn. As usual, I tiptoed into the kitchen and started making breakfast. Oatmeal bubbled on the stove. I fried some eggs and heated up some bagels. This would probably be the last meal I ever made for this family. I wasn't trying to play the victim. I just believed in finishing what I started. This 10-year habit would end with this one last breakfast. Around 7 o'clock, David emerged from his bedroom, rubbing his tired eyes. He saw me busy in the kitchen and paused, a complicated expression on his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end just mumbled a mom and sat down to eat. He ate quickly, his mind clearly elsewhere, his eyes darting away, unable to meet mine. Vanessa didn't come out for breakfast. She was probably still angry about last night. Or perhaps she simply couldn't be bothered to eat food I had prepared. Ethan came out with his backpack on, called out Grandma, grabbed a bagel, and rushed out the door. I watched his youthful, impatient back and sighed softly. The child was innocent, but the chasm between us had already grown too deep. "David," I began, my voice calm, as I placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. "I've decided to move back to the old apartment." David was in the middle of a spoonful of oatmeal. He choked, coughing violently, his face turning red. He looked up at me, stunned as if he couldn't believe his ears. "Mom, what are you saying? Move back. Why? Is it because of yesterday?" I cut him off, my face still holding that calm, almost distant smile. "It's for no particular reason. The old place is empty anyway, and the tenants just moved out. I was thinking, all the old neighbors are there. It'll be nice to have people to talk to. I'm getting old. It's better to live in a place I'm used to." I deliberately avoided mentioning the locked door or the word outsider, leaving us both a final shred of dignity. I wasn't afraid of them. I just didn't want another pointless argument as I was leaving. My goal was clear. Leave and then, using the rights the law afforded me, take back what was mine. David was clearly agitated. He put down his spoon. "Mom, what are you doing? That place is so old. The amenities are outdated. How can we be at ease with you living there all by yourself? Was it something Vanessa said yesterday? You know how she is. Her bark is worse than her bite. Don't take it to heart. I'll talk to her. Her bark is worse than her bite." I repeated the phrase silently to myself, finding it incredibly ironic. The cold lock, the 2 hours waiting in the freezing wind, that soul-crushing word, outsider. Could those things be erased by such a flimsy excuse? I shook my head, my tone gentle but firm. It has nothing to do with Vanessa. It's my own decision. I've thought it over. You're both busy with work and Ethan is grown up now. You don't need me to take care of you anymore. If I move back, it'll be quieter and better for all of us. When I said better for all of you, I looked at David calmly. His eyes flickered. It seemed my words had hit a nerve. Perhaps deep down he had long felt that his mother was a burden, but filial duty prevented him from ever saying it. But Mom. David wanted to say more, but seeing my resolute expression, he was at a loss for words. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Well, the old place hasn't been lived in for ages. It must need a lot of work. How about this? Wait until I have time on the weekend. I'll help you clean up, and then we'll see. No need, I refused crisply. I've already contacted a moving company. They're coming this morning. I can manage the old place by myself. This morning. David was completely stunned. He probably thought I was just talking or that it would take me at least a week or two to prepare. So soon. Yes, while the weather's still decent, I said lightly, beginning to clear the dishes. You should get to work. Don't be late. David sat there, watching me bustle around, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of relief. He didn't protest further, just mumbled. Well, can you manage on your own? If you need anything, you have to call me. I nodded without turning around. Call him from now on. I doubted I would be calling him for anything, at least not for help. At 8:30, the moving van arrived on time. The movers came up to get my things. They were efficient. I had very little, just one suitcase and 2 cardboard boxes of miscellaneous items. Throughout the entire process, Vanessa never came out of the bedroom. David stood in the living room looking helpless, wanting to help but not knowing how, just repeating, "Mom, be careful with that." I took one last look around this home I had tended to for 10 years. The stove top in the kitchen, which I had polished until it shone. The plants on the balcony, which I had nurtured until they thrived. Every corner of the living room bore the mark of my cleaning. This place had once been filled with laughter, and it had also consumed countless tears and so much of my hard work. But that was all in the past. I picked up my old tote bag, which held my important documents and my phone. "I'm leaving," I said to David. "You two take care." My voice was as calm as if I were commenting on the weather. No accusations, no complaints, no reluctance. This extreme calm seemed to make David even more uneasy. He opened his mouth, but only managed to squeeze out, "Mom, travel safe. When you're settled, give me a call." I nodded, said nothing more, and turned to follow the movers out the door. The motion-activated light in the hallway flickered on. Step by step, I walked steadily down the stairs without looking back. I knew that the moment the door closed behind me, my connection to this home was severed for good, and my own battle, or rather my own quiet new life, was just beginning. Sitting in the passenger seat of the moving van, watching the streetscape fly by in reverse, my heart felt hollowed out, yet filled with something unfamiliar and hard. Goodbye. Or rather, good riddance. The van left the modern subdivision where my son lived, and the scenery outside the window gradually became older and more familiar. We had reached the old part of town. The streets grew narrower, lined with aging sycamore trees, whose bare branches pointed toward the grey-white sky. The storefront signs had a last-century feel to them. The grain and oil shop, the shoe repairman, the barber, all faces that had been there for decades. The van stopped at the entrance of a familiar alley. It couldn't go any further in. I got out, my feet landing on the slightly uneven concrete. I took a deep breath of the cold air. It was filled with the unique smell of the old city, a mixture of coal smoke, old furniture, and the scent of daily life. That smell, strangely, calmed my wandering heart. My old apartment was at the end of this alley on the 4th floor of a 6-story building. There was no elevator. The movers helped me carry my boxes and suitcase to the foot of the stairs, and after I paid them, they left. I looked up at the familiar building. The paint on the exterior was peeling in places, and the windows looked old, But I knew that beneath this worn facade was a space that was entirely mine, a space where no one could evict me. The stairwell was a bit dim, cluttered with some of the neighbors' things, but it was reasonably clean. Step by step, I slowly climbed to the 4th floor. The arthritis in my knees protested, but a certain strength in my heart kept me going. With every step up, I felt one step further from that suffocating house and one step closer to my own territory. I stood before the security door of apartment 401. The faded good fortune sticker that a tenant had put up years ago was still on the door, now bleached white. I took out the key from my tote bag, a key I hadn't used in 10 years, but had always kept safe. It was slightly rusted. I carefully inserted it into the lock, my heart beating a little faster, afraid the lock might be broken, too. With a clean click, the bolt retracted smoothly. I gave the door a gentle push and it swung open. A wave of air thick with dust and the musty smell of a long unoccupied space hit my face. I instinctively waved a hand in front of my nose and stepped inside. The apartment was dark. The curtains were drawn tight. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. The overhead light in the living room flickered a few times before staying on, casting a dim yellow glow. The light illuminated a room full of dust, dancing in the air. The furniture was covered with white dust cloths, and a thick layer of grime coated the floor. Everything was just as the tenants had left it. Silent, empty, lifeless. I walked to the window and yanked open the heavy curtains. Dust rained down. The winter sun struggled to pierce through the grimy glass, creating beams of light in which countless dust motes danced. I opened the windows, letting the cold, fresh air circulate and clear out the musty smell. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around. The sofa, the coffee table, the television stand. Robert and I had picked them all out together. They were old-fashioned but sturdy. The cross-stitch I had made was still hanging on the wall, its frame covered in dust. The potted plant in the corner had long since withered, leaving only a tangle of dry vines. Everything here was frozen in time, just as I had left it 10 years ago. Time seemed to have stopped, accumulating a decade's worth of dust. I didn't feel sad or desolate. Instead, I felt a deep sense of homecoming. It was dilapidated and dirty, but every inch of this space belonged to me. I didn't have to walk on eggshells around anyone. I didn't have to worry about someone changing the locks and shutting me out. After a short rest, I rolled up my sleeves and began the massive task of cleaning. It was a huge undertaking, sweeping, mopping, dusting, scrubbing every corner of the kitchen and bathroom. I worked slowly. My stamina wasn't what it used to be. I had to take frequent breaks. The dust made me cough and the cold water turned my hands red. But I didn't feel tired or miserable. With every stain I scrubbed away, with every clean patch of floor I reclaimed, my heart felt a little lighter. This wasn't just manual labor. It was a ritual, a ceremony to cleanse the gloom of the past 10 years and welcome a new life. I cleaned out the bedroom that Robert and I had shared, wiped down the bed frame, and made the bed with the linens I had brought with me. The room still smelled a bit stale, but tonight I would finally be able to sleep in my own bed. I worked for most of the day and only managed to get the bedroom and living room into a habitable state. My stomach was growling. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. I wasn't sure if the gas stove still worked. I tried turning it on and with a soft whoosh, a blue flame leaped to life. Thank goodness it worked. I boiled some water and made myself a cup of instant noodles I'd brought from my son's house. Sitting at the dining table, dusty but now wiped clean, bathed in a ray of sunlight, eating that simple meal, I felt a sense of satisfaction and peace I hadn't known in years. In the afternoon, I went to the local community office and the utility company to get my services restored. The woman at the community office was the same one from years ago. She recognized me and greeted me warmly. "Margaret, you're back. It's been so long." Her simple greeting was a balm to my soul. Here, I wasn't anyone's burden. I wasn't an outsider. I was just Margaret, a familiar face to my old neighbors. That night, I lay in my own familiar bed. The mattress was a bit firm, and the blankets had a faint musty smell, but my heart was more at peace than it had been in a decade. Outside, the old city was quiet with only the occasional bark of a dog and the distant hum of traffic. I took out the small wooden box, opened it, and by the dim light of the bedside lamp, I looked at a photo of Robert and me. He was so young in the picture, his smile so gentle. I gently stroked the photograph and whispered in my heart, "Robert, I'm home. I'm back in our home. Don't you worry. I'm going to be all right now." I knew the road ahead was long. The apartment needed serious repairs. My life needed to be rebuilt and the legal matters with my son's family needed to be resolved. But at that moment, I didn't want to think about any of that. I just wanted to savor this hard-won peace that was all my own. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. No nightmares, no anxieties. 10 years of living in someone else's house. 2 hours of freezing in the wind. One heartbreaking word, outsider. It all seemed to have been swept into a corner for now along with the dust of the old apartment. This was my fortress. This was my starting point. From tomorrow on, I was going to live again for myself. The first few days back in my old apartment were filled with a whirlwind of small but necessary tasks. There was the deep cleaning, buying basic household supplies, and calling a handyman to check the aging wiring and pipes. Every day was exhausting, but every day was also fulfilling and real. Under my own 2 hands, my little nest gradually shed its look of abandonment and began to feel like a home again, filled with the warmth of life. David called me on the second night after I moved out. His voice over the phone was tired and held a faint, almost imperceptible note of resentment. "Mom, so you really moved back? Are you settled in? That old place hasn't been lived in for so long. Is it even livable?" he asked. I was trying to tighten a new faucet, cradling the phone between my shoulder and my cheek. I kept my voice as neutral as possible. "Everything is fine. It's mostly cleaned up. You don't need to worry about me." He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Vanessa, what she said the other day was out of line. I apologize on her behalf. Mom, please don't be angry. How about we come over this weekend to see you?" "There's no need," I replied quickly and firmly. "It's a mess over here. Nothing to see. You two are busy. I can manage on my own." I wasn't being spiteful. I genuinely didn't want any more involvement with them. A superficial visit and polite chatter wouldn't change the fact that I was an outsider. Why bother acting out the part of a happy family? Besides, I had more important things to do. David seemed surprised by my resolute refusal. He paused again, his tone becoming a little meek. "Well, then you take care of yourself. If you need anything, you have to call me." "Okay, I will," I said. Then used the leaky faucet as an excuse to hang up. In the following days, he would occasionally send a text message asking if I had eaten or telling me to dress warmly. I always replied with a simple "I ate" or "okay," never adding another word. I could sense his cautiousness and also a degree of relief. Perhaps my departure was a liberation for him as well. At least he no longer had to be caught between Vanessa and me. About 3 or 4 days of this quiet life passed. One afternoon, while I was hanging blankets on the balcony to air out, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, is this Mrs. Margaret Hayes?" A polite male voice with a professional, almost deferential tone asked from the other end. "This is she. Who is calling?" I asked a little wearily. "Hello, Mrs. Hayes. Sorry to bother you. My name is Brandon from Prime Properties Realty." The man introduced himself enthusiastically. "We understand that the property you own at this address is currently vacant. Is that correct?" My heart sank. A realtor. How did they know my apartment was vacant and get my number so directly? I had only been back for a few days. How did news travel so fast? I composed myself and replied coolly, "Yes, it's vacant, but I'm living here myself now. I have no plans to rent or sell." "Oh, Mrs. Hayes, please don't be so quick to refuse." The realtor, Brandon, sounded even more eager. "Let me tell you, the location of your apartment is fantastic. It's an older building, but the neighborhood is convenient, and it's in a good school district. These older places are in high demand right now for both renting and selling. The prices are great. We have clients right now who are looking specifically in this area. How about we set up a time to come by and chat?" I guarantee you'll be satisfied with the price. I gripped the phone, my fingers tightening. My intuition told me this wasn't so simple. I asked calmly, Mr. Brandon, may I ask where you got my contact information and the news that my apartment was vacant? There was a noticeable pause on the other end, followed by a forced laugh. Well, Mrs. Hayes, you know how it is in our business. We have our ways. It's mainly because your property is so desirable that we've been keeping an eye on it. Was it my son, David, or my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, who contacted you? I cut him off, getting straight to the point. Another brief silence. Then his voice became vague and awkward. Well, Mrs. Hayes, you see, we're just working for our clients, since you're living there yourself now. Well, never mind, then. Sorry to have bothered you. So sorry. Before I could ask another question, he hung up. Listening to the dial tone, I stood on the balcony. The winter sun shone on me, but I felt no warmth. Instead, a chill crept up from the soles of my feet. It was them. Of course, it was them. I had barely moved out, and they were already so eager to get rid of my only shelter. Were they planning to sell it and split the money or rent it out to supplement their own income? Were they so sure I would just obey their wishes and let them do as they pleased? Or had they completely forgotten, or perhaps never known, that legally I had the final say over this property? It seemed my quiet departure hadn't made them realize the gravity of the situation. They probably thought I was just an old woman throwing a tantrum, that after a while when my anger subsided or I couldn't handle living alone, I would come crawling back to be their convenient outsider again. They might even be plotting how to take over this apartment for good. I put down the phone and looked at the neighbors coming and going in the alley below. My heart felt like a block of ice. I had originally thought that as long as they left me alone, I could keep the will a secret and we could coexist peacefully. After all, David was my son, and I didn't want to be too harsh. But now, they had overstepped. They had gone behind my back to meddle with my home. This was no longer just a family squabble. It had crossed my bottom line, the very foundation of my survival. I went back inside and closed the door, shutting out the world. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock. I walked to the small wooden box, opened it, and took out the will enclosed in a manila envelope. The paper was slightly yellowed, but the writing on it was clear and strong. I traced Robert's signature, his solemn expression as he signed it years ago flashing before my eyes. He had said, Margaret, in this world, people can be unpredictable. We have to protect ourselves and we have to set some rules for the children. At the time, I thought he was being too cautious, almost unkind. Only now did I understand that he had seen through the complexities of human nature. I picked up my phone, found Mr. Crawford's number, and dialed it without hesitation. Vincent, it's me, Margaret, I said, my voice exceptionally calm. I have something that I think I'll need your help with. Mr. Crawford responded immediately. Mrs. Hayes, of course. Tell me what's on your mind. I told him everything about the realtor's call and my suspicions. After listening, Mr. Crawford paused for a moment, his tone becoming serious. Mrs. Hayes, I understand. What they're doing is not only unreasonable, but from a legal standpoint, it could also be considered an infringement on your property and residency rights. Since they've made the first move, we can't wait any longer. Here's what I propose, Mr. Crawford said, his thoughts organized and clear. First, I will send a formal legal letter to Prime Properties Realty on your behalf, clearly stating that the right to dispose of this property rests solely with you. Any unauthorized contact or attempts to deal with the property are illegal. We will demand that they cease all contact immediately and disclose the source of their information. Second, he paused, his voice growing heavier, regarding the will and the matter of support. Given your son and daughter-in-law's recent actions, especially your daughter-in-law locking you out and verbally abusing you, and now their attempt to dispose of your property, they have seriously violated the spirit of the will regarding their duty of care and the protection of your right of residence. We should consider initiating a formal legal notification process. Legal notification? I asked, unsure of what he meant. Yes, Mr. Crawford explained. I will arrange a meeting with your son David on your behalf. I will formally present him with a copy of the key clauses of the will concerning your right of residence and his duty of care. I will make it unequivocally clear that if they continue with their current behavior, fail to fulfill their obligations, or attempt to infringe upon your legal rights, then according to the will and relevant elder protection laws, you reserve the right to pursue legal action and potentially initiate a review of the inheritance conditions stipulated in the will. He simplified it for me. Basically, it's a formal, serious, legal warning. I listened quietly, a storm of emotions churning inside me. I never thought it would come to this. I just wanted to live out my remaining years in peace. Yet here I was being forced to wield the law as a weapon against my own son. But they had been the first to cross the line. I took a deep breath and made my decision. All right, Vincent, let's do it your way. Send the letter as soon as possible, and you can arrange the meeting with David. It was time they learned a few things. Of course, Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Crawford promised gravely. Leave everything to me. I will handle it with care to achieve the warning effect while trying not to escalate the conflict more than necessary. Hanging up the phone, I walked to the window and looked out at the grey sky. A storm was brewing. I knew an unavoidable confrontation was coming. But this time, I would not be the helpless old woman shivering in the cold, waiting for someone else's mercy. My fortress was built, and my weapon was polished. The undercurrents were swirling on their end, and on mine, I was ready. Mr. Crawford was highly efficient. The day after our call, he informed me that the legal letter had been formally sent to the realty company. The effect was immediate. I received no more harassing calls from any realtors, but the peace was superficial. I knew the real confrontation was yet to come. Sure enough, 2 days later on a Friday afternoon, my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I looked at the familiar name, my heart calm. I only felt a sense of here we go. I answered the phone, my voice as even as ever. Hello, David. The voice that came from the other end was not David's usual tired and perfunctory tone. It was filled with anxiety, confusion, and a barely suppressed rage. Mom, what on earth are you trying to do? His voice was sharp and rushed, almost a shout. Why did you send a lawyer to see me? Talking about some will, some legal warning. What is all this about? It seemed Mr. Crawford had followed through with the plan, and the effect was clearly significant. It had hit a nerve. I walked over to the sofa and sat down, getting comfortable before I spoke slowly. David, calm down. Mr. Crawford is my lawyer. He was simply doing his job, informing you of some things you needed to know. Things I needed to know. David's voice cracked with emotion. Mom, I'm your son. Can't we talk about things ourselves? Why did you have to bring in an outsider, a lawyer, to threaten me? Do you have any idea what he told me today? He said, I have no say over the old apartment, that if Vanessa and I don't fulfill our duty of care, I could lose my inheritance. What is that even about? When did we ever not take care of you? It was one time we forgot to give you the new key. Vanessa's words were harsh. Yes, but do you really need to blow it up like this? And bringing up a will? When did Dad even make a will? Why didn't we know anything about it? His barrage of questions came like cannonballs full of hurt, anger, and disbelief. I listened quietly, letting him vent. When he was finished, I said coolly, David, that will was made by your father and me together before he passed. We had Mr. Crawford notarize it. It is legal and valid. The reason we didn't tell you was because we didn't think it was necessary. We hoped for peace in the family, but now it seems your father was right. I paused, then continued in a steady voice. As for the duty of care, it's about more than just providing food and shelter. Respect is the most basic form of care. Locking me out of the house for 2 hours and calling me an outsider. Is that respect? The moment I move out, you contact a realtor to try and get rid of my home. Is that respect? My voice was low, but every word was clear and sharp, traveling through the phone line to David's ear. The other end fell silent, filled only with the sound of his heavy breathing. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice tinged with defeat and disbelief. Mom, how did you become like this? So calculating. We're your son and daughter-in-law. That old apartment is just sitting empty. We thought if we rented it out or sold it, the money could be put to good use. It could improve your life, too. How did that become infringing on your rights? Improve my life. I almost scoffed. David, I am 66 years old. The improvement I need is a quiet, respectful environment. It's basic dignity, not the kind of life you think I should have. That apartment is my nest, my last resort. How it's managed, when it's managed, that should be my decision, not yours to make behind my back. My tone sharpened slightly. And as for being calculating, David, search your conscience for the past 10 years. Who has been calculating whom? I gave you all the rent from the old apartment every month. I did all the housework. I raised Ethan. What did I ever calculate? All I wanted in return for my work was a peaceful old age. And what did I get? I got called an outsider. My words were like needles pricking at David's conscience. He fell silent again, this time for longer. I could picture his expression: shock, panic, and the shame of being exposed. He had probably never imagined that his meek, submissive mother would so clearly lay out the accounts like this. Mom. When he finally spoke, his voice was much lower, raspy with fatigue. Even if Vanessa was wrong and I didn't do enough as a son, I apologize. But can we please not make such a big deal out of this? What Mr. Crawford said was terrifying. We're family. Can't we solve our problems behind closed doors? Why do we have to take it to court? We'll become a laughingstock. I don't want to make a big deal of it either, I said, my tone softening, but my stance remaining firm. David, the reason I had Mr. Crawford talk to you wasn't to sue you or to make us a laughingstock. It was to make you and Vanessa understand a few things. I spoke each word distinctly. First, I may be old, but I'm not senile. I have my rights and my boundaries. Second, that old apartment is mine. No one, without my permission, is to touch it. Third, how you treat me will directly affect what you will inherit from me in the future. The law isn't just words on a piece of paper. Mom. David's voice held a note of pleading. Please don't be like this. We know we were wrong, okay? Please move back in. I promise Vanessa will never be disrespectful to you again, and I will pay more attention to you. Let's just go back to how things were, okay? Go back to how things were. I repeated the phrase softly, a bitter taste in my mouth. David, we can't go back. Not since the moment I was locked out. Not since I heard the word outsider. We can never go back. I'm doing well in the old apartment. It's quiet. I don't want to go back to that life of walking on eggshells and living in constant anxiety. I finished with a tone of finality. David, I've made myself clear. From now on, you live your life and I'll live mine. As long as you don't bother me, we can maintain the appearance of a mother-son relationship. But if you have any other ideas or if you disrupt my life again, I left the sentence unfinished, but the warning was clear. On the other end of the line, there was a long, dead silence. In the end, David said nothing more and quietly hung up. Listening to the dial tone, I put down the phone and let out a long breath. My palms were sweaty from the tension, but my mind was clear. I knew this conversation, this hardline stance delivered through a lawyer, was like a bucket of cold water, shocking my son out of his fantasy that his mother could be treated however he pleased. He might be angry, confused, or resentful, but he would have to accept the fact that his mother was no longer an outsider he could take for granted. The prelude to the storm had sounded, and I had shown my hand. Now it was up to them to choose respect and restraint or to continue down a path of self-destruction. I walked to the window. The setting sun cast a golden glow on the old buildings. My heart was at peace. If I couldn't have the warmth of family, then upholding the justice of the law and my own dignity would be another way to live. After that unpleasant phone call with David, life seemed to enter a strange, eerie calm. David didn't call again, and even the perfunctory text messages stopped completely. On social media, I'd occasionally see Vanessa post pictures of the three of them out to dinner or at the movies. They looked happy and carefree, as if my absence hadn't affected their quality of life at all. In fact, it seemed to have made it better. That was fine by me. I was happy for the quiet. The old apartment under my care was looking more and more like a home. I bought a few houseplants. They weren't anything fancy, but their vibrant green was comforting to look at. I cleaned up the balcony, and on sunny days, I could sit out there, soak up the sun, and watch people come and go in the alley below. I reconnected with a few of my old neighbors. Sometimes, we'd sit in the community garden chatting. They would complain about their daughters-in-law or brag about their adorable grandchildren. Their conversations were filled with the everyday concerns of ordinary older people. In that atmosphere, I finally felt like a normal living person again, not just an awkward presence in my son's house. I even picked up an old hobby of mine, listening to classic opera. I used some of my retirement savings to buy a nice radio and would tune into the classical station. The soaring arias, paired with a cup of tea, could fill a whole afternoon. Time slowed down and my mind grew quiet. But the calmer things were on the surface, the more I knew it was likely the calm before the storm. David and Vanessa, especially Vanessa, were not the type to take a loss lying down. The lawyer's warning might have scared them for a while, but in the long run, I doubted they would give up, especially not on the old apartment. I tried to guess their next move. Would David try to sweet-talk me again? Would Vanessa show up at my door throwing a tantrum, or would they come up with some other scheme? I prepared myself for anything. Come what may, I would face it. However, I never imagined their counterattack would be so vile and vicious. It was an ordinary morning. I was on my way to the nearby farmer's market as usual. As I reached the end of the alley, I sensed something was off. A few old neighbors who usually greeted me now averted their eyes, huddling together and whispering. When they saw me approaching, they quickly dispersed, pretending nothing was wrong. I was puzzled, but didn't think much of it, and continued to the market. On my way back, at the entrance to my building, I ran into Mrs. Chen from the floor below me. She was a warm-hearted woman who had always been kind to me. She saw me and immediately pulled me aside. Her voice was low, her face a mixture of worry and anger. "Margaret, have you upset someone recently?" My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my composure. "Mrs. Chen, what's wrong? What happened?" "Oh, you don't know." Mrs. Chen slapped her thigh. "For the past couple of days, someone has been posting these awful flyers all over the neighborhood, on the community bulletin board, too. They're saying you're a disrespectful old woman, that you drove a wedge between your son and his wife, caused chaos in their home and that you're using the fact that you own an apartment to try and ruin their lives. The things they're saying are just terrible." My head buzzed and blood rushed to my face. I had expected something, but to hear such vicious slander, I still trembled with anger. "What else?" Mrs. Chen grew more indignant as she spoke. "They're also saying you were promiscuous when you were younger and now you're just a bitter, difficult old woman. Just a bunch of baseless, reputation-destroying lies. A lot of people who don't know the truth are talking." I suppressed the rage and humiliation in my heart and asked as calmly as I could, "Mrs. Chen, are those things still up?" "The ones on the community board were torn down by the association, but then more just get put up. They're like gum on a shoe. And some people have found little leaflets slipped under their doors." Mrs. Chen sighed, looking at me with pity. "Margaret, I know you're not like that. This has to be someone deliberately trying to slander you. Do you think it's your son and his wife?" I nodded, a coldness spreading through me. Who else could it be, using such a low-down tactic, trying to force me into submission with rumors to destroy my reputation among my old neighbors and make my life here unbearable? It was a cruel move, far more insidious and wicked than a direct confrontation. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for telling me," I said, gratefully squeezing her hand. "The truth will speak for itself. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not afraid of what people say." Despite my brave words, when I walked past the community bulletin board and saw the torn remnants and glue stains and the stares of a few strangers who pointed at me, I felt a heavy stone settle in my chest, suffocating and painful. I kept my head down and hurried home. I closed the door, leaning my back against the cold steel, and finally felt like I could breathe again. Tears of humiliation welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. What good would crying do? Tears couldn't wash away slander. They would only give the people behind this the satisfaction of seeing me suffer. I walked to the window and looked out at the grey sky. I had thought that by standing my ground legally, I could find peace. It seemed I had underestimated the depths of human malice. They didn't dare to confront me openly, so they shot arrows from the shadows using the oldest and most effective weapon against me, rumors. For a solitary old woman, this was a devastating attack. Lies repeated often enough can destroy a person. If I let this go, my reputation would be ruined. I might not be able to hold my head up in the very place I had lived for decades. I couldn't just sit back and take it. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call Mr. Crawford. A lawyer's intervention might not be effective in this situation and could even make things worse. I found the number for the head of the neighborhood association, Mrs. Thompson. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, well respected in the community. I had known her from before. When she answered, I calmly explained the situation. I didn't directly accuse my son and daughter-in-law. I simply said that I seemed to have offended someone and was now the target of a malicious slander campaign which was seriously affecting my life and reputation. Mrs. Thompson was very concerned and angry. Margaret, don't you worry. We won't tolerate this kind of behavior in our community. I'll have someone patrol the area and remove any defamatory flyers immediately. I'll also post a notice in the community group chat reminding everyone not to believe or spread rumors. If you find out who's behind this or if you have any evidence, you should report it to the police. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, I said sincerely. I don't have any proof right now, but I will be on the lookout. Hanging up, I felt a little better. With the community association involved, it would at least curb the spread of the rumors. But I knew it wasn't enough. The root of the problem remained. As I was contemplating my next move, whether to inform Mr. Crawford or to take further action, like gathering evidence to sue for slander, my phone rang again. It was a local landline number that looked vaguely familiar. I answered it. A familiar and loathsome voice came through the line. It was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Her tone wasn't cold or harsh like before. It was filled with a syrupy fake concern and feigned sympathy. But underneath it all, I could hear a note of triumph and provocation. Mom, it's me, Vanessa, she said, drawing out the words. I heard you've been having some trouble over there, that the neighbors have some misunderstandings about you. I gripped the phone, my fingers tightening. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. The storm was no longer hiding. It had revealed its ugly face, and this time it was armed with vicious rumors, intending to destroy me completely. Vanessa's voice oozed through the receiver. Her feigned concern as cloying as grease. Mom, it's just so awful having the whole neighborhood gossip like that. When David and I heard about it, we were just heartbroken for you. She sighed as if she truly felt my pain. You know, if you ask me, living all alone in that run-down old place just makes you a target. Why don't you just move back in with us? When we're all a family together, none of this drama ever happens. I could almost picture her expression, a smug, condescending smirk as she watched her little drama unfold. The rumors were her doing, and now she was using them under the guise of concern to force me back under her roof, back into the role of the powerless outsider. Rage churned in my chest. But after everything I had been through, I had learned to control it. I took a deep breath. My voice as cold as ice. Vanessa, you know better than anyone where those rumors came from. You can stop the crocodile tears. There was a pause, and then Vanessa's voice turned cold as well, the pretense stripped away. Mom, now you're the one being nasty. How would we know? We just heard what other people were saying. Maybe if you weren't so difficult to get along with, you wouldn't have people talking about you. She huffed. I was being nice, offering you a way out. If you want to be stubborn and tough it out on your own, don't come crying to us when your reputation is ruined and you can't even live there anymore. A naked threat. I actually laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. A way out. Thank you for your concern. But my reputation is none of your business. My conscience is clear. I'm not afraid of whispers in the dark. But you, on the other hand, using such dirty tricks. Aren't you afraid of a little karma? You, Vanessa was sputtering, furious. Margaret, don't push your luck. We're trying to be civil for David's sake. Do you really think we want you back here? The filthy insult finally came out. I didn't get angry. I just calmly cut her off. Are you finished? Because if you are, I'm hanging up. And by the way, this is my formal notice to you. Do not call me again. Do not interfere in my life again. If you do, you will face the consequences. Consequences. What consequences? Vanessa shrieked with laughter. You think that pathetic old will is going to scare us? Let me tell you, that apartment belongs to David. What right do you, an old woman, have to squat in it? We have plenty of ways to make you hand it over. Do you? My voice was still level, but it carried an unshakable force. Then by all means, try, but I suggest that before you do anything else, you take 7 days to cool off. 7 days. What's that supposed to mean? Vanessa demanded. It means nothing in particular, I said. It's just a suggestion. After 7 days, if you still want to cause trouble, I will be ready. Just don't regret it later. Without giving her another chance to speak, I hung up and immediately blocked her number. I put the phone down, my knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. I was calm on the surface, but Vanessa's venomous words still stung. They had become so shameless, so willing to discard even the last shred of decency. 7 days. I repeated it to myself. This wasn't a cooling-off period for them. It was the final preparation window for Mr. Crawford. Just before Vanessa's call, I had made a difficult decision. The slander campaign had crossed the line. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a blatant attack on my character and an illegal infringement on my rights. If I continued to be passive, they would only become more brazen. I contacted Mr. Crawford again and told him about the rumors. He was furious, stating that this constituted slander and harassment, a serious violation of my rights to reputation and peace. Mrs. Hayes, their behavior has become truly reprehensible, he said gravely. A simple legal letter and a warning are clearly not enough to stop them. We must take more decisive legal action to resolve this once and for all and protect your rights. After some discussion, we decided to initiate the final plan. Mr. Crawford would on my behalf issue a final legal ultimatum to David and Vanessa, giving them 7 days to comply with 2 demands. First, they must immediately cease all slander and harassment and issue a public written apology in the same areas where the rumors were spread, such as the community bulletin board and resident groups. Second, they must provide a written guarantee that they would respect my rights of residence, property, and personal dignity, and fulfill their duty of care, acknowledging their previous wrongdoing in locking me out and attempting to dispose of my property. If they refused to comply within the 7-day period, I would no longer be bound by familial ties. I would formally file a lawsuit against them for violating elder rights, including but not limited to infringement of residency rights, defamation, and neglect, and simultaneously trigger the review of the conditions of the will, petitioning the court to revoke or reduce David's inheritance rights. It was a point of no return decision. Once we went to court, the mother-son bond would be irrevocably broken. But this sword had to hang over their heads. Only by making them feel the true weight of the law and the severe consequences of their actions would they possibly back down. Otherwise, I would have no peace in my remaining years. These 7 days were an ordeal for me, and for them a final chance at redemption. Mr. Crawford acted quickly. That same afternoon, he confirmed that the formal legal letter and final ultimatum had been delivered to David and Vanessa via courier and email. For the next few days, I lived my life as usual, shopping, cooking, listening to opera, enjoying the sunlight, but a knot of tension remained in my stomach. I kept an eye on the community. The rumors did seem to have died down. At least, I saw no new flyers. The neighbors' stares were still a bit awkward, but the pointing and whispering had stopped. There was no response from David and Vanessa. No calls, no texts, and certainly no apology, just a dead silence. I imagined their reactions upon receiving the letter. Furious, panicked, or perhaps dismissive, thinking I was bluffing. The 7th day arrived. I waited from morning until night. My phone remained silent. There was no news of compromise or communication. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red, the last flicker of hope in my heart died out. They had chosen to fight to the end. They didn't believe I would actually sue them. They didn't believe the law would be on my side. Or perhaps, blinded by greed and resentment, they simply no longer cared about the consequences. In that case, there was nothing left to hesitate about. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Crawford's number. My voice was steady without a ripple of emotion. "Vincent, the 7 days are up." There has been no response. Mr. Crawford was silent for a moment on the other end, then said with gravity, "I understand, Mrs. Hayes. I will file the lawsuit with the court first thing tomorrow morning." "Good," I replied with a single word and hung up. Outside, the night was falling. I knew an unavoidable showdown was about to begin. And this time, I would not back down. The 7-day agreement was over. The ultimatum had expired. The next time we met, it would be in court. The days after filing the lawsuit were marked by a profound, deathly silence. It was as if David and Vanessa had vanished from the face of the earth. There was no news from them whatsoever. Even the vicious rumors had completely disappeared. The community returned to its usual tranquility. Mrs. Thompson even called to check on me, saying the trouble had stopped and that I should rest easy. But this peace felt like the unnervingly still eye of a hurricane, so oppressive it was hard to breathe. I knew it was just a facade. Once the gears of the law begin to turn, they don't stop easily. Mr. Crawford informed me that the court had accepted the case and the summons and complaint would soon be served to the defendants. I went about my daily life, but I was fully aware that a massive storm was brewing. I even prepared myself for them to show up at my door, ready for a fight or some other desperate act. However, I had once again underestimated their arrogance and ignorance. 3 days before the court date, I received a rather surprising call from Mr. Crawford. His tone was complex, a mixture of relief and a hint of sadness. "Mrs. Hayes, there's been a new development," he said. "I just received a call from the court. Your son, David, is asking for you to drop the suit." "Drop the suit?" I was taken aback. "I haven't sued them yet." Then I realized what he meant. Did they make a move? "No, it's not that they're suing you," Mr. Crawford clarified. The court's mediator contacted them to attempt a pretrial settlement. According to the mediator, your son and daughter-in-law only seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation after being served with the summons. But instead of responding or seeking a settlement, they tried to delay by denying they had received the summons and questioning the court's jurisdiction. After the mediator clearly explained the legal process and the potential severe consequences, your son, David, unilaterally stated that they would waive their right to respond and forfeit any and all claims to your property inheritance. All he asks is that you drop the lawsuit and not take them to court. Mr. Crawford paused, adding, "The mediator said your daughter-in-law was extremely agitated and said many nasty things, but your son seemed to just break down. He's willing to give up his inheritance just for me to drop the suit." I held the phone speechless for a long time. This was completely unexpected. I had braced myself for a fierce court battle, not for them to surrender so abjectly at the last minute. Were they finally scared? Or was it the public humiliation they couldn't face? Or perhaps was it the last shred of conscience in David finally cracking under the immense legal pressure making him unable to face his own mother in a courtroom? 100 different emotions churned within me. I couldn't tell if it was the joy of victory or a much deeper sorrow. "Mrs. Hayes, what are your thoughts?" Mr. Crawford asked for my decision. "Since they've already expressed their intent to forfeit their inheritance claims and have promised not to harass you, our primary legal objectives have essentially been met. If you agree, we can file a motion to dismiss the case. Of course, if you still want a formal judgment, we can proceed." I was silent for a long time. What good would a judgment do? It would only tear away the last shred of dignity, cementing this mother-son relationship as a legal tragedy. It wouldn't give me anything more. I had used the law to defend my rights and my dignity. That was enough. "Let's drop the suit," I finally said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "As long as they keep their promise and leave me alone, this is over." "Understood, Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Crawford replied. "I will handle the remaining paperwork." After hanging up, I sat alone on the sofa. The last rays of the setting sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. A dramatic legal war had ended in an almost absurdly anticlimactic way. I felt no joy, only a vast emptiness and a profound sadness. I had won with the law and the will. I had won back my home and my peace. But what I had lost was my only son and the home that had once held 10 years of my life. Was that really a victory? I didn't know. A few days later, news spread like wildfire through the old neighborhood and eventually reached me. Not from David, but from Mrs. Chen. She told me in a hushed conspiratorial tone, "Margaret, did you hear? Your son's family, I think they're moving." Moving? I was stunned. Moving where? Did their lease run out? Did the landlord not renew? Or did they buy a new place? "I'm not sure," Mrs. Chen said. "But I saw them packing things up. They seem to be in a real hurry. I mean, who moves right before the holidays?" A thought struck me. A lease. I thought they owned that condo. How could it be a rental? A vague suspicion began to form in my mind. I immediately called Mr. Crawford and asked him to look up the property information for the condo where my son lived. The results came back quickly, confirming my suspicion. The condo was not owned by David and Vanessa. It was a rental. All their money, plus the $30,000 I had given them, and the 10 years of my rental income had likely been spent on maintaining their glamorous lifestyle, on Vanessa's designer bags and so-called investments. They couldn't afford to buy a home. They were probably in debt. The claims about a mortgage had been a complete lie. No wonder they were so desperate to get their hands on my old apartment. No wonder they crumbled so easily in the face of the law. They were a house of cards. This final piece of information was like the last piece of a puzzle, showing me the complete picture of the last 10 years. What a massive web of lies and vanity I had been living in. My sacrifices had not only been unappreciated, they had fueled their greed and hypocrisy. The morning after I learned they were moving, I was cleaning my apartment when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wondered who it could be. I looked through the peephole and froze. Standing outside were 3 people, David, Vanessa, and a reluctant-looking Ethan. Behind them were 2 uniformed court officers and Mr. Crawford. David's face was ashen, his eyes darting away, unable to meet mine. Vanessa's face was a mask of resentment and bitterness, but also a kind of desperate fear. Ethan was staring down at his phone as if none of this had anything to do with him. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. Mrs. Hayes, one of the court officers, stepped forward, showing his credentials. His tone was official. "We are from the County Sheriff's Department, Civil Enforcement Division, regarding the case of Margaret Hayes versus David Hayes and Vanessa Hayes. Although the plaintiff has filed for a dismissal based on the evidence provided and the commitments made by both parties during pretrial mediation to ensure the plaintiff's rights are not infringed upon in the future, we are here today to conduct a formal follow-up and notification and to supervise the defendant's fulfillment of their written promise, namely to permanently forfeit any and all claims to the property at this address and to guarantee they will cease any and all forms of harassment against you." The officer's voice was clear and firm, echoing in the stairwell. David and Vanessa hung their heads even lower. Mr. Crawford stepped forward and handed me a document. "Mrs. Hayes, this is a notarized copy of their signed statement, forfeiting their inheritance rights and guaranteeing they will not harass you. Please keep it." I took the document. The paper was light, but it felt as heavy as lead. The officer continued, addressing David and Vanessa. "We expect you to abide by the law and your signed commitment. Do not cause any further trouble. Otherwise, Mrs. Hayes can refile her suit at any time based on these documents, and there will be no further opportunity for mediation. We know, we understand." David's voice was weak, the words barely squeezed out from his throat. Vanessa suddenly looked up, her eyes glaring at me with pure hatred, as if they were dipped in poison. Her lips trembled. She looked like she wanted to spit some final venomous words at me. But seeing the stern faces of the court officers, she swallowed them back, left with nothing but heavy breathing and eyes full of rage. And so my family stood before my door under the supervision of law enforcement to perform this final humiliating ritual. They hadn't come out of love to apologize. They had been compelled by the force of the law to guarantee they would leave me alone. The scene was absurd, cold, and brutally real. The procedure is complete. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Hayes. The officer nodded to me, gave David's family one last stern look, and then left with Mr. Crawford. The stairwell was now empty, except for the four of us, facing each other in an awkward standoff. It was David who finally broke the silence, his voice broken, almost a plea. Mom, we're moving today. From now on, he couldn't continue. Vanessa yanked his arm sharply. What are you still talking to her for? Let's go, she hissed. She shot me one last venomous glare, grabbed Ethan, and stormed down the stairs without a backward glance. David remained, looking at me one last time. His expression was a storm of emotions, shame, pain, relief, and maybe, just maybe, a final lingering trace of affection he himself might not have recognized. Then he too turned and stumbled after them, his footsteps disappearing down the stairs. I leaned against the door frame, looking out at the empty stairwell. Sunlight streamed through the window, dust motes dancing in the beams. They were gone. They had taken their bitterness and humiliation with them, and they had also taken any last faint hope of reconciliation. Where would they go? I didn't know, and I no longer cared. From the moment they chose to build their lives on lies and treat their family with malice, their path was destined to be a difficult one. I closed the door, shutting out the world. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old clock. I walked to the center of the living room and looked around my small nest, old but entirely mine and filled with a sense of security. The plant on the windowsill had new shoots, tender and green, full of life. I had won with the weapon of the law. I had protected my home, my dignity, and the peace of my final years. But I had lost my son, and I had lost the family I had once considered my own. Tears finally streamed down my face, not of anger or of self-pity, but of a vast, unspeakable sadness and loneliness. The war that had started with a cold, locked door, had ended with a court-supervised departure. There were no winners, only mutual destruction. But life had to go on. I dried my tears and walked to the balcony. The sun was warm on my skin. In the alley below, old neighbors were chatting leisurely and children were playing. This was my life now. One woman, one old apartment, and a peace guaranteed by law. Perhaps this, at 66 years old, was my true home. I picked up a small watering can and began to water my plants. The water trickled down, nourishing the dry soil, and it felt as though it were nourishing my own barren heart as well. The past was the past. For the days to come, I would live, and live well, for myself.